Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're nearly on the home stretch now, those of you who are flagging a bit, but we're obviously having some fantastic and really insightful talks, and as well as the whole buzz of the show. So I hope you're enjoying yourselves and learning lots, making great connections. I'm Stephen Spencer, and I'm delighted to be introducing Simon Brown to talk to us about the Black Newstead project. I want to say it's highly topical. It shouldn't be, should it? But it is. And so I think because there is so much in this that we can learn from and adapt and perhaps have ideas crystallized or new ideas introduced, that I think this is going to be probably one of the most valuable talks of even the incredibly valuable talks that we've had. So anyway, I'll stop wibbling on and ask you to join me in welcoming Simon.
Thank you. Cheers. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. There's a lot of you. I wasn't expecting that. So thank you very much. Are you okay hearing me at the back? Brilliant. Okay. If there's a struggle, just tell me and I'll shout. I'll go up a bit more. So thank you. So yeah, I'm Simon Brown. I have the great honour of being curator at Newstead Abbey, which is a historic house in North Nottinghamshire. I'm sure you've all visited, so I won't dwell on that, but there's an image there for you to see. If there are any questions about anything I'm talking about today, then please do feel free to contact me. My contact details are there, and they'll be on the last slide as well. So if you take snaps of any slides, make it them too. So as I say, Newstead Abbey is a historic house in the heart of Sherwood Forest. It's easy for us to forget that, in North Nottinghamshire. And we're part of Nottingham City Museums and Galleries. I had to get up a serious ladder to take that photograph, but I hope it shows the setting that the house is in. It's a beautiful part of the world. So what I'm going to be talking about is our project Black Newstead, in which we co-produced interpretation on the black history of the site, and that was totally co-produced with artists and with the community in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. This was a really new way of working for us at Newstead, and it was pretty much on minimal resources. It's worth saying I'm part-time in this post, so I'm 2.5 days a week. So I do other work in museums alongside it, and at the time I was doing this project, I also worked at the National Justice Museum in Nottingham as well. So I'll talk a little bit about the process we went through, give examples of some of the work that we showed as part of the project, and share some learning. I hope there's time for questions at the end, but as I say, please do contact me if you have any questions after today. So as I say, I know you've all visited, but just in case, here's the house. It was built in the 12th century as an Augustinian priory, so it was a religious house. And it became a family home in the 1540s at the dissolution of the religious houses by Henry VIII. And it was home to the Byron family. So the most famous of which is George Gordon, the 6th Lord Byron. You can see him on the left there, looking typically understated. He was one of the most remarkable men in 19th century Europe. He was revered as a great scholar, political figure, traveller, athlete, and many other things. But first and foremost, he was an amazing poet. He was an amazing genius with words, and none of the other stuff would matter if it wasn't for that. It's worth bearing that in mind for him. And he loved his home at Newstead, and it inspired some of his most heartfelt work. So a lot of people that come to visit Newstead Abbey know about Lord Byron and have been drawn here by him. But there are many other compelling stories from before and after his time here. He was influenced by everything that came before, and he's an indelible influence in everything that came after. After Lord Byron sold Newstead Abbey in 1818, the house passed through the families of the Wildmans and the Webbs, and it came into being at Nottingham City Council in 1931. So it's been a museum to him and as a historic house to visit since then as part of Nottingham City Museums and Galleries. So that's a huge arch of time. There's over 1,000 years of stories relating to one site. Newstead has been shaped and formed by countless people. Every person that has come through the door, both before Lord Byron and after, and even today, shapes the place. That's something that we're always trying to hammer home as part of our interpretation strategy. You, as a visitor, visiting Newstead Abbey today, we'll shape this place in the same way that others have before. So it's endlessly shifting in that sense. And representing such a huge range of lived experience in our interpretation is constantly evolving. We treat it as an evolving process. So for me, as curator, it's my central mission to tell Newstead's story, but I'm also determined that everyone who comes feels welcome. I put that front and center of everything we do. And that Newstead is a place for you to bring your whole self as a visitor and have a valuable experience. That's important to me. That's my motivation for working in this sector. You know, when I was growing up, for example, I didn't feel places like this were for me, for people like me. I never thought of it as any deeper than that, but I just felt people like me didn't go places like this. And I'm determined that no one feels like that, because I love this place and I love the places in which we work. So the Black Newstead project is a way in which we're trying to do work that helps bring about that end goal that we're doing. I certainly wouldn't hold us up as exemplars of doing it perfectly. We haven't done this perfectly. But I hope that this is a valuable case study for you all, for places that are trying to change the ways of working and trying to make people feel welcome on minimal budgets and difficulties in terms of resources. So that's what I hope you'll be able to take from it today. So I'll show a little bit of the interior as well. That's my office on the left. No, it's not. Just to give an idea of the interiors of it. So to give a bit of context for the project, we have a research strategy for our collections at Nottingham City Museums and Galleries, where we identify areas of our collections and our places that have been under-researched, that we know have not been given the targeted resources to give us the facts about what we're interpreting. We're very lucky to have a partnership with Midlands Four Cities collective of universities. Universities seem to be banding together and forming these research collectives as a way of getting funding for AHRC. In the Midlands, it involves universities in Nottingham, Leicester and Birmingham. So we're very lucky to have that ongoing partnership. And I think that's something that's underutilised in museums. There are very clear crossovers between the needs of a university and the needs of museums. So we're very pleased to exploit that where there is an opportunity. So in 2019, if you can cast your minds back to the before times, we commissioned postdoc researchers on 3 key areas of Newstead Abbey's history. The first was the medieval history of the site, so pre-dissolution. The second was the built architecture of Sherwood Forest. We know a lot about the trees. We know a lot about that guy who lived in Sherwood Forest, who was a Yorkshireman anyway, but we don't talk about that. So we know about those things. And the third report was our connections with black history and colonialism. Those have been identified through previous work we've done as gaps in our academic knowledge. So we wanted to, for a start, make sure we had academic, rigorous research in those areas that underpinned anything we did. So those reports were delivered at the end of 2019, and our plan was to use them in our ongoing interpretation. But then, of course, the pandemic hit and disrupted all of our plans. And of course, we had all the disruption that you all know about, and I don't need to go into. But the other big thing, of course, that happened in 2020 was the Black Lives Matter protests that spread across the world. We've heard a really brilliant case study about what was done with the Colston statue in Bristol earlier today, which was really valuable to hear about. And there was a huge protest in Nottingham on Forest Fields, and it was right at the point of lockdown. There weren't even any buses running. People walked for miles to get to that protest. And that was a hugely significant moment for the city, and I think we all felt that. But, I mean, those of you who were part of our local authorities will be able to relate to the fact that the council then suddenly became very interested in our work. And any work that the City Council wanted to do, they said to us as a museum service, we want to harness the energy around this. And we feel the museum's a way to do that. Now, if you work in local authorities, you'll understand that those moments are the ones to leap on, because that means you have political support for your work and you have the resources for your work. So we were already doing this. We were already wanting to represent black history and interpret it appropriately. And all of a sudden, we had the council asking us to do something we'd been telling them for months we were doing anyway. And those kind of conversations began to come about. So it was an opportunity to leverage that support. So In response to those requests, I designed this project. What I wanted was an exhibition showcasing the stories that came out in the report, which would then be brought into the permanent interpretation. That was important, permanent interpretation. It was also important to me that all the contributors would be black themselves. I didn't want to be another white curator telling black stories or telling any kind of stories that are outside of my lived experience. Because we're doing two things, really. We're telling the history, but we're also giving it a response, an interpretation of that history. And I didn't want to be a white man doing that. So that was what I put to the council and to the people above me, and thankfully they supported that. So hopefully this will be a good case study in terms of how we did that in our setting. So if I talk a little bit about the process now, the report, as I say, was delivered to us. It was co-authored by Helen Bates and Suzanne Seymour at the University of Nottingham, brilliant academics working in this area. And I took that report and did the other thing we all want to do as curators, which was map objects against the report. That's the fun bit of curating, right? So we got to choose objects that told the stories that came out in the report. It's a big report. It's about 80 pages. I'm happy to email it to anyone who wants to read it. It's really worth reading. So I mapped objects against it, and I selected objects that could tell the stories that the report highlights. So I've got 3 examples here. On the left, you'll see an overmantel, so a wooden carving, basically, which is above one of the fireplaces at Newstead. We have about 5 or 6 of these in situ. It dates to 1540. Sadly for me, the paintwork dates to about 1980, with no records kept of that job. So cheers, whoever did that. But you can see it's a really intricate thing. And in the middle of that is the Byron coat of arms. And around that are all manner of different figures and iconography. And that includes black figures, clearly black figures amongst that. But because there are no records of it, that's been held up in some ways as an opportunity for our interpretation. So that's that object. In the middle is a sideboard. It's made of mahogany. It's one of over 100 objects in the house made of mahogany. Now, you'll know that the mahogany tree is native to South America and the Caribbean. Between 1720 and 1760, over 90% of mahogany that was imported to Britain had grown in Jamaica, so where it had been felled by enslaved African people. And that market was to make furniture such as this piece of furniture here. That's never been interpreted, and that story has never been shown for that piece of furniture. We have over 100 pieces in the house that are shown for that. So, and of course, that gave a huge difference to the island of Jamaica. By the 1790s, the majority of Jamaica's mahogany trees had been felled, altered the landscape entirely. That was a tangible effect of empire, and it made it more susceptible to the floods that affected the island in later years. So that's a significant document of that effect. The third object is a screen that belonged to Lord Byron. He made it himself. If you can look closely, you'll see that it's made, it's by collage, basically, and he covered it in pictures of boxers. He was really interested in boxing. The other side is pictures of actors from the theatre. Those were 2 of his great passions. And 2 of the people depicted on the screen are Tom Molyneux and Bill Richmond, 2 black men who were brilliant boxers at their time, and Bill Richmond was one of Byron's tutors in boxing as well. So this is fan stuff. This is just like having posters from smash hits on your wall. This is fan art created by a significant man in Lord Byron. So those are 3 examples of objects. And we came up with a group of about 30. And I created a document with images of objects and information on them. Basically, an object label. No more, really. It's again something we like doing as curators, is writing. He's writing too much, so I tried to keep it as succinct. So this is an example, really, of one of the objects that I used. And I made this document of images and information on the objects as object labels. So I sent this document, along with a project proposal and the reports themselves, to individual black artists, writers, photographers, academics, poets, inviting them to make a mini commission for an exhibition, but would then come into our permanent interpretation. We decided to put that picture at a day rate for an artist. So we said you had two options. You could have a day rate and create a piece of work that takes 1 day's work. Or you could create something a bit more involved, a bit bigger, that would take 3 days. What we wanted was mini commissions, not huge, elaborate artworks. We wanted a variety and diversity of black voices within the show. That meant that the budget went further as well. So we were able to do that and create mini commissions in that sense. Alongside those commissions, we sent these documents to black staff networks at the City Council, at Nottinghamshire County Council, both universities within Nottingham as well, and to our teachers network that we've developed. Inviting people to give any kind of response they want, any kind of written or otherwise response to these stories, and we will be able to include that in exhibition. So the plan was that these contributions will be displayed alongside the objects interventionally across the house, so in the room settings that you would see. This would be a temporary exhibition and then brought into our permanent interpretation. The important point I made in those documents was that I committed to displaying everything that came back, which, you know, is quite a scary thing to do as a curator. But what I wanted to demonstrate was trust. Trust for the voices that we were inviting, but also the fact that we're showing voices that are not mine. So I don't really have a choice. I don't really have a right to make that choice, in my view. That was quite risky, but I wanted to do that. It was important that we did that. So we wound up with about 20 contributions from 11 contributors in total. And I'm going to give you some examples now. I have 5 examples of the artworks that we have and the responses that we have, just to kind of give a flavour of what we did, really. So this is the work of Honey Williams, whose work I hope you will have seen. She's a brilliant artist in Nottingham. She works in collage digitally and physically. On the left, you can see the interpretation panel. That's the panel we used. I'm sorry, you won't be able to read that, but I'll be able to send you all documents afterwards if you email me. And there's a link at the end to give you documents of all of our interpretation as well. So Honey chose Lord Byron's favourite teapot, which is in the bottom right. That's a teapot we know that belonged to Lord Byron, but if there is a classic case of a mundane object that represents links with empire, especially in the 19th century, it's a teapot. It was made in China. It was used in a very mundane way. It was seen as an aristocratic thing to drink tea. Of course, it involved sugar, which grew on sugar plantations. All of these connections with empire were brought together in this mundane object, and Honey phased in on that when I showed her around the house and I showed her the objects. And she created this beautiful artwork, which she called Lord Byron's Debt Collector, as a way of creating an image that is a character that is seeking reparations for those connections with empire, with Newstead Abbey's connections with empire as well. So we displayed that in Lord Byron's dining room, so you can see it there with the teapot below it. That is fake food on the table, by the way. It's plastic. Don't worry, I hadn't left my dinner there. But that shows the way it's been displayed. And that was a really great visual work because we replaced one of our very classical portraits with that work of Lord Byron's grandfather, which was an interesting thing to do. The second example I'll give is a collaboration from the community. We went to the Vine Community Centre in Hyson Green in Nottingham. And the vast majority of people that go there are black or Afro-Caribbean. And Charmaine Binns, their manager, Charmaine Binns Mohammed, has been a huge help to us, both in this project and in others. And Charmaine worked with the residents there. They held sessions, basically. She showed them all the documents and said, you know, we're inviting contributions to this history at Newstead Abbey, somewhere that you're all aware of. And whenever we talk about community contributions to Newstead Abbey in a creative way, it usually comes back to poetry because of Lord Byron, because we're connected with poetry so much. The portrait on the left is of Thomas Wildman, who bought Newstead Abbey from Lord Byron in 1818. All of his fortune came from sugar plantations in Jamaica. So he inherited a plantation and a fortune, all of the profits of which were used to buy Newstead Abbey and to refurbish it as well. Those plantations were, of course, worked by enslaved people from Africa. So there's a direct connection there between Newstead Abbey and the slave trade and slavery. So This is a loose collection of words that the group brought about, and I said, look, I'll display it however you want so. And we displayed that alongside the portrait of Thomas Wildman, which of course is there to make him look as grand as possible. He fought at the Battle of Waterloo. He's wearing his Waterloo medal in that portrait. So we displayed it alongside the portrait there. So that's where it remains. The image there on the right is Mrs. Anderson, who is an amazing figure in Nottingham. She's one of the group at the Vine, and I was really pleased to see that she was involved. I've known her for a long time, so I was really glad that Mrs. Anderson was involved. So that's that example. This third example is from Norma Gregory, who is a brilliant social history curator in Nottingham. Norma founded the Black Miners Museum, which has held exhibitions all over the country, including the National Coal Mining Museum. She's a great person to work with for social history projects. And in the development of the Black Miners Museum, she had interviewed people that had worked at Newstead Colliery. There was a huge colliery on the grounds of Newstead Abbey, which closed in the 80s. And she interviewed the one black miner who was there in the 50s and 70s, Kenneth Campbell. So we had a transcript of that interview and the oral history of that, the sound of it, alongside some objects from Newstead Colliery. So this was a way of talking about its relevance to this project, but Newstead Colliery in general. So we put some of those objects from the colliery around the Duke of Sussex bedroom, one of our grandest bedrooms. We replaced one of the grand portraits in there with a photograph of Kenneth and put him there in the place that the very traditional portraits would normally be. And we played the sound of the interview with him in the room. That was a really great thing because what I learned through the process and through the exhibition opening was that visitors, different visitors who weren't even aware that the project was happening and were seeing it, were encountering it across the house, would latch onto different things, different elements of history that they were interested in. And a lot of people are interested in the colliery because some of them may have worked in there or had family that worked in there. That was an immediate hook into the project and the wider things that underpinned it. And once we had one thing, it felt that they felt far more relaxed to engage with the rest, and that was really valuable for the project. So that's that example. What this project also gave us was the opportunity to leverage in other projects that were being developed at the time. So there is a great agency in Nottingham called Dance4, who engage dance artists to work in all cultural institutions across the city. And we just started on an Arts Council funded project with them that was separate from this. It was developed a long time before this. And we worked with an artist, Eleanor Sikorsky, who herself then co-commissioned, or sub-commissioned, I suppose it's a work. She positioned herself as a curator, and she commissioned other artists to create work within Newstead Abbey. One of those was Seke Chimotengwende, who's from London. He's not here, Seke, are you? I don't see him, but you know, some of you may have worked with Seke before. He's a brilliant choreographer, and his work looking at ghosts and haunted houses as metaphors for how histories of slavery and colonialism haunt the present. So that's an incredibly pertinent thing to our house, and it was great that we were able to work with Seke on that. The first question I'm asked whenever I tell anyone where I work is, have I seen a ghost? And no, I haven't seen a ghost. And, you know, it's quite boring to give that example, but, you know, that's a really great way in to the ways in which we're doing this. It's a new thing for us to work with dance artists as well. But Seke worked in residency at Nottingham and spent a week at Newstead Abbey with a group of 6 artists who created a new choreography in response to the house. And we were able to show these brilliant photographs by Ben Harriott in the rooms in which they were taken. That's part of that. Another strand of that project was the work of Mary Pearson and Mayfield Brooks, 2 dance artists. They're both from the States, but Mary lives in Liverpool. And we were able to work with them. They spent another weekend in residency in the grounds at Newstead Abbey, creating a new choreography. They also created a film in direct response to a brilliant poem by Lord Byron called Darkness. If any of you want to read Lord Byron, and you know, it's difficult stuff to read, a lot of it, but Darkness is brilliant. because it's mercifully short, for one thing, but it's a beautiful thing that showcases his gift for words. And that's what I gave to Mary and Mayfield when they asked for examples of Lord Byron's work. And they made this film in response to that. So that was a great way of leveraging in externally funded work that was happening elsewhere in the service and giving it a showcase as part of a group show. The last example I'll give is Offaly, who's Chevy Jordan, his name is. Offaly is his work name, the artist name that he uses. He's from Nottingham and he lives in London now, and he's a fashion photographer by trade. He's a brilliant visual, his sense of visual awareness is brilliant. He uses colour very well. You can see from the backgrounds there and the images that he's made there. Offaly was really interested in the screen that I described earlier and his connection with boxers. He was really interested in Lord Byron's interest in boxing. And what he decided to do was to hire actors to come to Newstead for a day and pose for new photographic portraits. So we had modern photographic portraits, but with these actors as Bill Richmond and Tom Molyneux, who I mentioned, who were, Bill Richmond at least was close to Lord Byron, and Tom Molyneux was idolised by him, really. So we showed one of those works right next to that screen. The screen is one of the star objects that we have, really. It's on loan to us from the Murray family, Lord Byron's publishers. So it was great to be able to use that in the interpretation and give a modern image in response to that. Offaly also wrote a biography of Tom Molyneux and Bill Richmond, and that was there for visitors to read so they could delve into that area that we were talking about. So that exhibition was on. It opened in October last year, of course, for Black History Month. That was one of the things that the council wanted. And I know there's conversations around Black History Month that would shoehorn Black History into 1 month of the year, and we were keen to get away from that, really. And I kept saying to people, this is permanent, this is permanent. But opening it in Black History Month meant that we could leverage the council support, but also the media support. Media outlets were looking for stories to do with Black History Month at this time. We were able to leverage that. We've got more press for this project than any other project in my 6 years at Newstead Abbey, and I wanted to leverage that. So as I say, it was a temporary exhibition, October to November, and then after Christmas it was brought into our permanent interpretation. So I'll share a little bit, just a few kind of like thoughts on learning from the process that we've been through. I mean, I've just said it's important that it's permanent. I kept hammering that to everyone because, again, going back to what councillors want, they want an exhibition. They want a thing that they can talk about for 2 months, and then it goes away for the next thing that they want to talk about. And I was keen that this isn't a thing. This is embedded. This is us talking about new interpretations of our history at the house. That was also important to the artists. Every single person I spoke with said that to me, and I was really glad that I got that said back to me, really. It showed the importance that we were on the right track. So it was an embedded intention of the project, really. The second point is that we had very few resources, but it was a big change still. As I say, we had all this support, but there's very little budget compared to big blockbuster tourist-friendly exhibitions in what is seen by the management as that. I think the total cost for this exhibition, and it was all out of core budget, the total cost was about 6,000. Which meant that we were able to do the commissions, we were able to do everything that we wanted to do. Where we were saving money was on build costs because, again, a temporary exhibition that's a thing in a white cube space requires technicians, requires redecoration, requires cases and all of that. We didn't need to do that because I was putting objects on display in the room settings of the house and putting the artworks and responses on display next to them. So it was me. It was part-time me, with colleagues who helped with design internally. But, you know, that was very light touch, and it meant that we could deliver something that we had the capacity to deliver. And it was important that we planned to that capacity because one of my concerns at the outset of the project was that we didn't overpromise. We didn't go to the community and artists and the public and say, we're doing this amazing thing, and then not do it, which, again, is something that often happens in museums. We overpromise and then stuff gets in the way, resources, or someone leaves and there's a 6-month lag between appointing a new person. These are all problems we all encounter with all of our projects. I wanted to make sure that what we delivered was what we'd promised and that it was good, of high quality. So we met those expectations, thankfully. The third point is kind of a narrative point, really, but in terms of how we were treating it from a curatorship perspective, we were treating Newstead Abbey as a character. I said at the start that we want to illustrate to our visitors and to people who haven't been before that Newstead Abbey is a constantly shifting and moving place. That's the same for all of our places. And this was an opportunity for us to treat the place as a character. Other rooms within the house talk about individual characters themselves. They talk about Lord Byron, they talk about Ethel Webb or Thomas Wildman or whoever. We talk about those people through the house. I wanted to do it the opposite way around. We're talking about the house through the people today and in the past. Visitors got this. Visitors understood that. I think that sometimes there can be anxiety that people will need everything explaining to them. We put faith in our visitors that they would understand what underpinned this as they went through the house. And we had a feedback box at the end. I wanted to make it a closed feedback box so people could speak their minds. So I would be the only one that would see that. So I wanted to hear everybody's reaction to it. And I wanted people to feel that they were able to do that. We had some outright abusive and a couple of outright racist responses, but that's less than 1% of what we got. What we got was overwhelmingly positive responses. People saying that they didn't expect to see this. People saying that they did expect to see it and it met their expectations. I was really pleased by that. And I hope that we gave them the opportunity to say if it didn't meet their expectations. If there were any problems that were anticipated internally inside the organisation, it was about perception. A lot of my colleagues were concerned about negative publicity. You know, we've all seen, certainly through work with decolonisation and the National Trust, that was said to me, you know, we don't want to be on the front of the Telegraph, etc. People were worried about that risk. That was the biggest thing that was put to me. But when I explained, I had a lot of individual conversations with individuals, volunteers, front of house colleagues, all of my colleagues really, explaining everything that underpinned this. This is about the history of Newstead Abbey in a new way, new stories that hadn't been told before, underpinned by academic work, but crucially, we want everybody to feel that they're welcome here and see themselves reflected here. And this is part of a wider approach to that. Once I was explaining that to colleagues repeatedly, daily, I started hearing them saying it to visitors in the house and saying it back to other people that were asking them those questions. And that's obviously vindication for any of us in that position, that it's a transmissible message, you know what I mean? It's a message that can get across in that sense. So thankfully that was enough for the people that I could speak with. So I'll leave it there. I think I'm all right for time, aren't I? So I will stop there, and I've got the last slide there is, as I say, it's got my contact details on. There's a link to a document I've put together. It's a PDF. It's got images of every single artwork, in situ and a better one as well. And also every interpretation panel, including the intro and the exit panels. So there's a link there. I'm experimenting with the QR code, see if it works, if you can open it now. But I'm also very happy to speak with anybody who wishes to. I didn't say at the start, and I'll get my wrist slapped later, but I'm also Vice President of the Museums Association. So if any of you wishes to speak about the MA, we have a stand here, but also if you want to speak with me, I'm very happy to do that, and you can contact me. If you want running commentary on Leeds United's transfer policy, then please follow me on Twitter. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Simon. Well, what's not to love, eh? I thought that was fantastic. So, do we have some questions for Simon?
Thank you, Simon. That was really interesting. I actually came on holiday to Newstead Abbey with my family last summer. It's a bit of a last-minute booking, but we stayed in the cottage on the grounds. So, when I didn't know the Abbey before that, I live in Bristol. But we really enjoyed our visit, and we saw some of the previous projects that you'd done with communities, like the film that Sean Sobers made.
Yes.
So it's really interesting to see how you're sort of continuing these projects. I was just wondering, because obviously this is part of a much broader objective for you and the museum service, but how do you sustain those relationships with the communities that you're working with? And how do you, diversify your audiences in the longer term? Because it's quite a hard place to get to. It's quite far from Nottingham city centre. I don't think there's any public transport. We drove there. So how do you keep that momentum going?
Yeah, thank you. Those are kind words. Thank you. We're in the middle of Sherwood Forest, and you don't think about that until you try and get signal on your phone. But and also when you try and get there, I don't drive, so I go on the train. It takes me about an hour and 3/4 to get there, each way. It's a beautiful walk through the grounds and everything. But we can't get the train and the bus there through the grounds. So when we talk about serving communities, we could actually say that we don't have a community within Newstead. There are 200 houses on the grounds, but they're mansions with swimming pools. It's a very specific audience. So in terms of your question about sustaining relationships, it's through doing additional work. And as you mentioned, that work we've done previously. I didn't want to mention, it was one of those things that I felt would muddy the waters in terms of mentioning it, but this is part of a long-going strand in terms of how we're seeking to engage with the city through specific projects interpreting that history. Even a good example of that as well. When I started, one of the first things I did was get the rainbow flag raised during Pride Month on the flagpole. I was like, why aren't we doing this, And even little things like that for people were coming up to me in the grounds and saying, families with children who are married and saying, we don't see ourselves seen here before ever until we see that, So that stuck with me because that shows that people are getting what we're trying to do, and hopefully that will lead to more people coming anecdotally that way. So it's almost like two approaches, really. Trying to be public about what we're doing in those targeted ways, but also sorting out having buggy parks, making sure we have accessible toilets, making sure that we don't have acres of text on the wall, having chairs, all those kind of things that make your visit better and don't say to you that you have to behave in a certain way to enjoy this place. That's what I want to get away from, really. Sorry, that's quite a waffly answer, isn't it? But that's the approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Any more questions for Simon? Yes.
Hello, thank you for that fascinating talk.
Thank you.
I'm curious about how you might navigate some of the pushback that you might receive. I imagine taking down the portraiture and replacing it with the artworks, those would have been difficult conversations to have with, say, other museum colleagues, or how do you navigate those conversations?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thank you. When I mentioned about the individual conversations, that's where it come about, really. And a good example is the work by Honey, the first work I showed where we replaced a portrait of Lord Byron's grandfather on loan to us from the current Lord Byron, from the 13th Lord Byron. But I thought, we'll do that because that's where Honey wanted it for starters. And, one of her suggested locations, and I felt the most appropriate place. I was having those discussions about what underpinned it, and I really can't hammer home enough how helpful it has been to me to make the time for that. Rather than firing off an email, I was seeking people out and saying and listening. People want to be heard. And a lot of it came about through anxiety. They didn't want to, as I say, people were concerned about public pushback in that sense. But one of the most helpful things was when people saw the artwork. It's really beautiful, stunning artwork that we've seen here. I was floored. I thought we'd have to incorporate, when you have 11 artists, you expect one or two not to work. You kind of think law of averages, some might not work, but they were all brilliant, I can say that. So the artwork itself helped to do that. And the fact that it was underpinned by the history of Newstead, it wasn't tokenistic or bolted on, it was about Newstead Abbey. So that's how I navigated that.
Thank you. Time.
Shall I come away from that?
I don't know if that was you or me. Time for one more question, if there is one. No? Okay. Well, for me, that just encapsulated the power of art to, reveal and speak truth, but also to be a brilliant part of the visitor experience. And also, I love the whole approach to the project that you took that meant that it was really correct in how you did it. That's my takeaway from this. So I'm sure everyone got a huge amount out of that. Thank you so much, Simon.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.